this all started when Tim and I were talking about, okay, so you want to build a NOC. You got a hole in the ground. At the end of the discussion, there's going to be a NOC there. How do you get there? What are the steps? And it's a pretty involved thing when you get right down to it. There's a lot of interlocking processes and what have you. So you have to look at it and say, let's take a look at let's break it down. Let's take a look at the functional components that make up a NOC and see how they're put together and see how they interlink to give you a better idea on how to build one in the first place. After that, Tim will be going into the nuts and bolts, the organizational details that make a NOC run, that make a NOC work, and that make it a successful organization. So, taking it apart, putting it back together, a deconstruction of the NOC, for lack of a better term. Just the concept of it. And so we begin. What is a NOC? In my definition of it, a NOC is an organizational unit. It's not people, it's not a bunch of blinky lights. It's an organization that involves people, processes, tools, and everything together to get the job done. It is an organization, and it is, I think it's imperative to think of it that way. What does it do? It handles day-to-day monitoring, everything from customer requests coming in, events coming in, what have you. Serving as a point of contact for customers. Maybe these people are the first people to talk to a customer when they call. Are they the front line? Maybe they're not. There are a couple of companies out there where they have a whole customer service group where even though they're never near the NOC, they answer with such and such company's NOC because the customer expects to contact network operations. And that's about setting expectations, which Tim will get to. Also, it involves creating, processing, and eventually resolving events that arise in the network. For example, you get down to the concept of if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it happen? And well, the short answer is, in this particular case, you can't react to it if you never saw it happen. The NOC is there primarily as one of the things NOC is there as an observer. A NOC is there to see the tree fall so you can do something. Now, if you don't see the tree fall, you're going to see, you might see a secondary event that will lead you back to this first event that you didn't catch much further along the line when things are a bit more unpleasant. So, as a brief aside, an overview of the following. I assert that all NOCs have things in common regardless of size. I mean, you can have a NORAD style, or a friend said, a NOC so large it turns into a customer indoctrination facility. It's one of the more clever terms for something like that, where you're saying, ooh, look at all the pretty pictures and spinning globes and stuff. But that isn't, and that's certainly pretty and interesting. But that's not necessarily part and parcel of a NOC. You can also have, two guys in a cage, one playing Quake, one playing Solitaire, and they wake up when something doesn't ping. Either way, it's still network operations and still handling the basic tasks of network operations. Briefly, also things that are going to shape your infrastructure are who and where are the customers. Who are they? Are they internal customers? Are they people that will have access to the same tools that you have to do your job? Or are you dealing with external customers where you can't necessarily share a lot of information or some information? And they will not have access to the same tools you have, so you have to build customer-facing interfaces to deal with them. In addition, stuff like service level agreements, SLAs are going to shape the infrastructure as well. What is your definition of bad? Is it a server bursting into flames? Is it a backhoe taking out 48 OC3s? Is it something else? Is it the load going up on a server? All of these things and how you react to them are going to shape your infrastructure. And now, onto the model. First, you have the inputs. Something's happened. Now, where are your event sources? You've got stuff like monitoring programs, HP Broken View, NetCool, NetScene, stuff along those, what's up gold, I don't care. Stuff along those lines, where these are the things that are your eyes and ears. These are the things that go out to the net and observe for you because, well, your people are sitting in a NOC somewhere. So these are things that observe the tree fall. These are things that show you that something's wrong and you have to react to it somehow. What didn't make it onto the slide is another event source is customer requests or customer events or customer reported events. Hey, I can't surf the web. or, hey, I'd like to re-IP this entire thing, or something along those lines. All of these are things that are inputs into the organization, which they must now process and react to. On the other end of it, you've got outputs. We've taken care of what happened. These are the sinks for the events that inputs were the sources for. Fixing the problems. Either being able to, maybe on the first call, fix the problem and get it and get everything working and the customer is happy. Handing off issues to be resolved by others if it's beyond the scope of what the NOC typically does in terms of fulfilling a request. These are all things that cause an event, however is reported, to come to a conclusion. So now we have inputs and outputs. What's in the middle? That would be process. The actions in the middle. What happens during this event? You've got your inputs, you've got your outputs. What happens in the middle? And these can be stuff as much as use your head and try to ping and see what's going on, to having sophisticated block diagrams that take up several walls, indicating everything that needs to be done to take care of a problem and run it through the organization. This can be anything, but typically it is what's codified in the middle. There are two schools of thought on this. There's the NOC as first level tech. These are the first people, after it's handed off from customer service, or maybe NOC gets it itself, saying, here's the basics of the problem, what can we do? And maybe the NOC has access to the tools and has the skills to be the first people on an issue and possibly resolve it right then and there if it's something, either straightforward enough or the NOC has dealt with it before. Another school of thought, which I don't personally subscribe to, but I've seen several times, is that the NOC are only dispatchers. They have the skills to open up tickets. They have the skills to manage the event sources in some way, shape, or form, and they have the skills to delegate. But they don't have the skills in particular to actually resolve issues. Those are dealt with by other groups. For reasons which are somewhat beyond the scope of this, I think that is a fairly poor idea. Nevertheless, I've seen it. One thing that actually didn't make it, if you can insert it right above where it says ticketing systems, is another integral part of this model, that being memory. A person has a memory, but an organizational unit like the NOC has to have a memory too. What is happening during this ticket? If you're running 24/7 NOC, somebody goes off shift, somebody comes on shift. Where is the record of everything that has happened with this event? Now, that can be a ticketing system, which keeps your institutional memory for you. It's what keeps the life cycles, what keeps the workflow. It's what keeps, at its very, very basic level, the email back and forth between you and a customer, or not. The point being that you now have an institutional short and long-term memory and continuity for a ticket. You can also go back and you can say, hey, we've seen this before, we can do something about it. So now we have input, process, output, and memory. Going away from the general structure of the NOC, here are two other things. You have the idea of scaling and portability. There's a huge variety of scale. I mean, and I'm sure we've all seen this. The idea that two guys at computers, or something that's hugely immense, where it's its own organization with 60 people and several departments inside it, and all this other wonderful stuff. But in some basic level, it all has the same basic components, however implemented. In addition, you have portability. Only for disaster recovery, can you pick up and monitor somewhere else? Theoretically, you should be able to function as long as there's some access to the tools and the event sources and sinks. That doesn't necessarily have to be a single place. Maybe that could be, pick up and go somewhere else. So let's go to just a theory, just a couple of examples of the theory. A bare bones NOC. Are all the functions there? No, there's really nothing else on the slide. I don't believe in animated slides. So let's go through it. Input, process, output, and memory. Input. Even if you're just pinging things, even if you have a program out there just pinging things saying, hey, something is down, you can do it, just at a very, very basic level. Process, even the simplest documentation is process. Just to get something running, just to say, okay, if this happens, do X, Y, and Z, and if you can't go from there, then you call somebody else. The most basic of process. But the purpose of process is to be deterministic. A customer knows when something goes down or when something goes wrong, this type of problem, then the NOC will act in this fashion. And that's all really it is. It doesn't matter how sophisticated or how simplistic it may be. Output, maybe it's not 24/7, but if you have voicemail and email access, you can communicate with the customer, and if the customer has to wait the next day, if it's a small enough scale operation, then so be it. But so you have your output. Memory, there are plenty of cheap or free ticketing systems. One of them, in my experience, has been RT, which is a fairly cheap ticketing system, but and it seems to work fairly well. I mean, and there's any number of them. The idea being that you have some way of keeping your memory, and that's typically in the form of a ticketing system because that's what they do well. If you take a look at something like a NORAD style NOC, customer indoctrination facility, for lack of a better term, input, process, output, and memory. Input. This could be a customer service center. The NOC never receives the first call. The NOC's main job is to be first level tech at that point. They are the ones who are dealing with the basic and maybe even not so basic problems, and so you have a customer service group department as a filter to take care of getting the basic questions answered before anybody talks to network operations. And if you have the resources, that's something you can do. Process. I mean, depending on the complexity and the events, it also depends upon how many events you're going to handle. In the case of where you're just dealing with 3 Ps, power, pipe, and ping, this may not be much. You could deal with 3 events, power, pipe, and ping. On the other hand, you may have, I've been in places where you've had 60 or 70 different kinds of events, and you have this big folder where you have to deal with, okay, what do I do in the case of this event? If this is the event, this is the description. This is what you should tell the customer. This is what you should talk about to somebody else, and work from there. In the case of outputs, well, there's something where it's kind of interesting because they're all the same. Email, phone. How else are you going to contact external customers? These are the 2 most popular ways. Maybe you have PagerX, maybe you have web access to a ticketing system. But either way. And for memory, you can have ticketing systems go as large as they come. Large workflow ticketing systems. Maybe you even have a in-house tools group to deal with making custom tools on the fly, a NOC engineering type of setup. Now, getting back to the concept of portable NOC. The definition of NOC, at least the one that I chose to use, says nothing about location. A NOC is, it is an organization that can do whatever it does, wherever it has to, whatever it is, and wherever it needs to do. So, for example, in a completely hypothetical situation, if a construction truck doing work on a building next door backs up to your main air vents and starts spewing diesel exhaust, and you have to evacuate the building, which of course is completely hypothetical, you can leave. You can leave and you take your computers with you and you VPN in or do whatever you have to do, and you just monitor, and you have your events and you have your sources and your syncs, and maybe you're even doing clever telecom hackery, forwarding your phones, and poof, you've got a NOC wherever you are. Maybe that's a dedicated facility somewhere that you've set up beforehand. Disaster recovery NOCs are not unheard of. Maybe it's just everybody go home, dial into this conference bridge number, and we'll all hash it out from there. But either way, it is portable, and portability is important. Likewise, in terms of having distributed functionality, being able to have, redundant sources of memory, redundant sources of input, redundant sources of output, and so on. In the case of portable NOC, once again, input, process, okay, they're not on here, never mind. Input, process, output, and memory. And the flexibility that it gives you. Inputs might be the telecom hackery to get the phones to your people wherever they may be. Processes might just be having a documentation online, someplace where people can get out of it. Outputs, well, if you can email or phone from home, you're okay. Memory, as long as you have access to some kind of ticketing system, you're okay. A lot of this is about, a lot of this is as long as you have access of some kind to do your job from wherever you are. Then the concept of having a single place with large amounts of monitors and blinking lights as a NOC is not, while it is very useful and it will be a boon to efficiency, is not necessarily, needed in a disaster recovery situation. So, to evaluate, it's an organizationally independent application. I can't repeat that enough, even though I obviously have been. You have centralized event sources and things, but you have distributed observers. And this is about NOC as observer. You have a whole bunch of people in different places looking at events and making sure that the events don't go unwatched wherever they may be. Yes, you lose efficiency in intra-NOC communications because you're not all in one physical place. On the other hand, it is sufficient for an emergency. In conclusion, it's not just a NOC is not just a place, and it's very important to understand that these are all set of things that are coming with you. When you have your inputs, your process, your output, your memory, the functions are similar. The portability is important, as I've said several times. And more importantly, you get to actually emphasize the functional divisions within the NOC to actually, maybe separate out things to optimize them better. So, given that, I have Timothy here with the nuts and bolts, the practical part of dealing with a NOC.
Okay, thanks a lot, Matt. We're going to go a little bit over the bolts of running a good NOC, and this is a practice session. Theory definitely has its place. I think without good theory, you can't have a good NOC, and you need to match your practice running your NOC to the components of theory: input, output, process, and memory. We're going to talk a little bit about what's in a good NOC. I think the key towards making an excellent NOC is to know what it is that you're doing as a company. Transit folks are going to have different inputs and outputs than content distribution networks and things like that. Kind of just to go over briefly, what you're looking at as a transit company, you're going to be looking at routing events, routing instability, device failures to a lesser extent, because if you've engineered your network properly, that's not going to be such an issue for you. But from the content side, you're looking at things like timeliness of content. Is the content there? Is the quality there? Is it getting to the end user? Are you putting a lot of load on the intermediate networks that you're transiting your traffic through? So you need to be thinking about all the things that we're going to talk about in this presentation as in the light of what it is that your company does. I subscribe to the belief that people will always be your key asset. Some people differ with me. There are a couple different conceptions here. There's a conception of, hey, you can throw anybody into a NOC if you train them properly. I don't really subscribe to that. I think that there's got to be some spin-up time for people that you bring in, but I think that people make your NOC. If your people are bad, if your people are unhappy, if they're not skilled, you're not going to get anywhere with a good, successful NOC, unfortunately. I wish it were that easy. And we'll talk about each of these items here as we go forward. Systems obviously make the job of people easier. I believe in having good managers in a NOC, and I don't believe in having a huge amount of them, but I think that you have to have more than just your senior network engineers. You have to have people that know how to manage people, because there's a lot of stress in a NOC, and there's a lot of arguments that can sometimes occur over customer problems, or should we say spirited discussions. And I think that as you go forward, you should definitely make sure that you hire good managers. And processes allow flexibility in operations while still maintaining your standards. The Windows version of PowerPoint doesn't auto-scale, so we're also going to talk about the facility. When you're thinking about a facility, I think you have to remember the real estate mantra: location, location, location. You got to have a portable NOC in case of disasters, but when you're planning out a real facility for a network operations center, you want to make sure that you pick an adequate location with the same criteria in most cases that you would pick for a data center. Redundant power, you want to have good proximity to fiber routes, you want to have multiple ingress into the building. A lot of the same things that you look at a data center, you're going to want to look at for a NOC. There's also a security perspective. You don't want to have a NOC in a place like Telehouse in New York or Jersey. It's not really the most secure place. You want to make sure that your people get in and out of there safely, as well as making sure that your customers feel comfortable getting in and out of there. So that's an area that a lot of people don't discuss, and it applies for a NOC just the same as for a data center. Environmental concerns, things like temperature, climate, and it also applies to your inside stuff. we're going to talk a lot about ergonomics and, what are the right things to do for your people. Your people want a good climate in the facility. It can't be 60 degrees in there 24/7. It's just not going to work for them, especially late at night when you're running the night shifts. So you want to make sure that you have good climate control. Ergonomics, obviously, is a big concern because that's going to affect the productivity of your people, right? Just as much as happiness of your people or morale. And the reliability of the NOC from a facility standpoint, is that facility going to be around for a while? Are you going to have to worry about natural disasters, acts of God, things like that? You also want to look at sources of labor. People don't want to drive an hour to go to a network operations center to work at 2 in the morning and then drive back. It just doesn't work. So try to make sure that you have good proximity to where the market is. Like if you were picking a place in Atlanta, you want to pick a place close to where network engineering types would live. I think I definitely agree with Matt here. Our conception of a NOC is you're going to receive requests from your customers, and your customers can be internal, external. I actually view a network monitoring system as a customer as well. That's where you're getting your requests from in the network monitoring system. It sometimes indicate problems, obviously, as you guys know, that your customer may never know about. So you're going to receive inputs. You're going to process them in some fashion, and you're going to communicate your resolution to the customer, but you have to keep the customer updated on status. I know a lot of guys and a lot of folks with NOCs that, you file a ticket, and if you have to call more than twice a day to get a status on the ticket, that's too often. I think that it's great for NOCs to be proactive and update the customers on status. Customers will be very pleased. Let's talk about the conception of a NOC as first, second, or third tier support. A lot of you guys, I guess, think of it as a dispatch center, when I don't know that we necessarily agree with that. NOC as dispatch is an okay concept, but from a customer satisfaction perspective, you don't really want to have your customer floating around to a lot of different places. You want to have a smart issue routing process in place. We like to have NOC people be dedicated staff. It saves a lot of problems later down the line, and your engineers and your designers are always doing other things. They could be at NANOC, they could be flying somewhere for training, they could be doing any number of things. So you just really want to try to have your NOC as both an engineering and design facility, all of the above. They need to be able to handle every problem that comes in, unless it's so catastrophic that it's a huge meltdown and you're flooding routes all over the internet. Your engineers should be smart at pretty much doing everything that your business does. If you're a transit company, they should all be smart at transit. I don't subscribe to the fact that you should, or the belief, I guess, that you should hire talent that has all the skill sets you want. It's better to hire talent and have them not have bad habits when they come in. But it's not always practical, I guess. And a smart issue routing process is key. The process for building a good NOC and running a good NOC, I think you have to receive those inputs. You have to process those inputs into what I would see as a problem to be resolved. You can have a lot of different network events, routing instabilities, situations like that, but that's not really necessary. I mean, it's going to be indicative of a problem, but make sure you identify the problem carefully. If you don't identify the problem, you're going to be spinning your wheels and you're not going to get anywhere. Once you have a problem, you want to route it to the correct individual. Sometimes the individual that you would route something to is the one that has to process the problem, so these don't necessarily go in order. You have to resolve the problem as appropriate and communicate status continually. We can't emphasize this enough. Customers hate calling to get status on tickets. I know you guys do, and I do too, so I can say that from experience. And you want to record the problem for later review and training. I think the conception of organizational knowledge within a NOC is very critical, because that's your key to efficiency. As you re-examine your NOC and your employees, and you want to do this very often, after action reviews on as regular a basis as you can, you want to try to reach as much efficiency as you can, and you got to communicate what you learn to other teams. If there are problems in your NOC that you guys are hearing about, and the engineers designed something that was wrong, or you guys designed something that was wrong, you need to take that input and fix it permanently, so that NOC doesn't have to keep, putting out fires. It's better to eliminate the fuel than to put out the fire. When we talk about the facility, we want to talk also about, kind of keeping other people out of your facility, as well as keeping your employees safe to come in and out. or your customers in that case. There are lots of ghetto NOC facilities. I think everybody can understand that. In environmental concerns, we already talked about this a little bit. You want to make sure that you have as much disaster planning as possible. Your NOC is the lifeblood of your business. Your network can run fine and it can be incredibly well designed, but we all know that it's like a house of cards. Even if you design for maximum redundancy, there's still something that can take down the whole network. That's just the nature of networking. So you want to make sure that you plan for those kind of disasters, and as planning for those kind of disasters, your NOC needs to be prepared for natural disasters as well. Sources of labor. We talked about not just engineers and not just NOC engineers, but builders. If you're building a new NOC, you want to make sure that you have good proximity to things like construction people and contracting firms. You don't want them to have to drive all over the place to get to your facility. As Matt suggests, I think portability is critical. The goal is obviously, if something goes wrong, everybody can pick up laptops and go and work from anywhere. If you can work, it's really a goal to be attained, but if you can work anywhere with the same effectiveness you would work in your facility, that's wonderful news, because that means that you're prepared for just about anything that comes. I subscribe to the idea of having people in different cities that also do NOC work, backup folks, maybe other firms that you have arrangements with that can pick up your operations, people that you're friendly with, things like that. So obvious resources, obviously computers, communications, phones, things like that. Not all that stuff works in a disaster, as 9/11 I think taught everybody. You want to make sure that you have multiple methods, multiple cell phones, good diversity in your facility, and don't have everybody in the NOC at once at any time, period. Even for meetings, you've got to have some people outside in a teleconference. Don't have everybody in one place. Not obvious resources. I think a lot of people overlook having vehicles, quick transport to wherever you're going to assemble your NOC, assembly of that NOC, good cases for shipping and relocation. You can't just throw a laptop or a router in the back of your car and drive 90 miles an hour to get to an emergency facility and have it work. Well, at least I know that wouldn't work in my car. And breakdown and reassembly schedules. Make sure you know exactly how long it's going to take you to reassemble your NOC. Multiple everything. Make sure you have redundancies everywhere you can. And make sure your resources are distributed. People, network equipment, everything. Even if you have multiple ingress into a facility, you're really walking the line if it's only one facility. Let's talk a little bit about hiring the right people. And I know we're low on time, so I'll try to rush through this as quickly as possible. From a skill set standpoint, you want to make sure your people have the skills to do their job correctly. I think that more importantly is flexibility. I know lots of folks that can do one thing very well, but they maybe can manage BGP, but they can't write a Perl script. And you want to make sure you have flexibility in your folks. I mean, everybody should be able to take several different career paths. Even if they want to do something, make sure they specialize in something else, so that you can have good coverage in the event that one of your folks leaves. It leads to retention. Retention is a horrible challenge in a NOC. It's not easy. Make sure they can deal with stress. Know what causes them stress. A lot of people overlook this. Yeah, somebody can deal with stress really well, but what really stresses them out? Customer complaints may not stress them out, but bad managers may stress them out. Know where your weaknesses are and know what that leads to. Scheduling. Make sure they're flexible with schedule. You want to try to get them in and out of the NOC as quickly as possible. And make sure they're stable individuals. I hate having people in and out of NOCs. It's hard to retain good people. This is all pretty standard. I like to make sure that the people don't have just NOCs as their whole life. They don't just work as their whole conception of life. But know what you can ask. There are obviously HR concerns that you can't say. Can they talk? How are their soft skills? And do they get flustered easily? I like to have an org model of classifying people according to their skills. Don't just put them in a hierarchy, just put them in a hierarchy. Make sure it matches your organizational needs, and make sure it matches the synergies between people. Keeping your people happy. I think, in speaking about environments, you want to make sure that they have good climate control in the facility, good ergonomics, good creature comforts. This includes things like the rec room. I hate to say it, but give them something to do outside of staring at a monitor. PlayStation 2, DVDs, TV, it's not that much, and it'll really help your folks. And keep in mind that you may have to have people in there longer than 8 hours, and they may have to get sleep. I know in a lot of NOCs you might have a guy on staff or a girl on staff for like 12 or 14 hours, and they need to be able to take a nap. Climate-controlled centers get cold at night. You want to have control over the space. Some buildings turn off the AC at night or turn off the heat at night, and at 2 to 4 a.m., those are really your critical hours. Your working conditions are different in a NOC than they would be in an office. In an office, it's normally 68 to 70 degrees all day. Hire a good ergonomic consultant. Don't underestimate this. I mean, build a good facility. Make sure you have lights, phones, keyboards, monitors, pens, all in the right place. Observation is key. I have cameras listed here, and I want to make sure that there's some clarification on that. When I say cameras, I don't mean watching your engineers 24/7. I mean doing an ergonomic study and kind of seeing, you know, during the normal course of a day, what are your engineers constantly getting up out of their chairs for or reaching for? Seating, make sure you have good seats and screen space. It's a messy business. NOCs, everything comes out in the wash in the NOC. You end up running the risk, especially if you haven't designed your network in an efficient fashion, that all the bad news comes to NOC. And you want to make sure that your people can deal with that. Cool heads, you want to have a good approach to solving problems, and they have to have been on the customer side. I don't really subscribe to micromanagement. I don't think many people here do. Retention of NOC staff is very difficult. People want to grow. You want to innovate as you're building your NOC, and you want to remember your core focus. Please make sure that your engineers really have a conception of everything that's going on in your business. They don't want to be surprised, and they need to know how to be effective when speaking to a customer, and they need to know what every department is doing. Engineering, sales, where's the traction? Are they going to have to deal with a lot more customers in the near future? In interviewing NOC folks, we'll just go over this real quickly. You want to make sure that they're willing to learn. You want to make sure that they have a good outlook on their career, and you want to make sure that they can work funny schedules. If I was an engineer, I'd be interested in three things. Can I grow at your establishment? Can I give you enough can you give me enough perks to enjoy my work? And is morale good? And do you have your stuff together? Is everything documented well? Do they ever wonder where an issue's got to be routed, and will they be called in outside their shift? Momentum is key. I think going forward in a NOC, you want to make sure that people are kept busy. Idle hands create problems. You know, keeping them working on different things and kind of switching them around in groups gives them a good experience and helps them to think on their feet. They should never have to make a customer wait more than 4 minutes on hold for anything. If you've got to put them on hold, call them back or have them call you back or communicate status. But don't just leave a customer on hold unless, you know, you're constantly checking back in with them. We believe in the philosophy of warm transfers. A customer wants, when he's looking at a NOC, he wants professionalism. Your engineers have to treat the customer as if they're paying you a lot of money, and the engineer wants the customer to continue to do that. Engineers can't yell at customers. Well, they can, but it doesn't always work. And your customer wants to have an ETR. It's okay if it keeps getting updated, but try to be realistic and try to give them a good time. Don't just say, I don't know. The customer wants to know what the problem is, or what it appears to be. It's not the NOC's responsibility to engineer a network for max reliability. Your responsibility is the operation of your network and making sure it's as smooth as possible. Customer wants to be comfortable. Don't allow a customer to hear these things. It's pretty easy. Even if you're not qualified, don't allow them to hear that. There's somebody else I'd like to bring in on the issue. The first person to take the call should be the person who follows it to completion. That's after the routing process occurs. If you route a call to an engineer, make sure that that the engineer knows where that problem is going to end. Don't just focus on ticketing. Make sure that you have good routing software. I believe in the philosophy of a tools group, and make sure that your group is agile. If all your designers and all your engineers get killed today or end up quitting or something like that, make sure that your NOC can rebuild the network. Real quickly, I want to go over policies and procedures. This is actually the longest section of the presentation, but I'll try to make it as quickly as possible. If you don't write it down, it's not a procedure. And people cycle in and out. You want to focus on procedures that affect the handling of a customer. The soft skills are hardest to learn, and you have to decide on full disclosure. Know what not to tell your customers as well as what to tell your customers. Incidents, tickets, call it what you will. Just make sure that everything gets summarized to the account executive, everything gets recorded, everything gets archived, and everything gets resolved. Don't leave an issue hanging for a week. Just final notes. It's just conclusion. Look to your employees for cues. Remember your focus and know what to say and what not to say. And as far as NOC building goes, we got to thank a couple folks. There's a lot of NANOC subscribers and some folks that we've had personal discussions with. I'd like to thank Sean for giving network operations an impetus for existing. His backhoe skills are supreme. And to the EFNet folks, I have a few very quick thanks. I'd like to thank Phil Heller, Steve Schechter, Adam Rothschild, Tim Yoakum, Doug Clements, Dan Golding, NAC in New Jersey, and Jeff Meltzer, and also Greg Maxwell and Matt.
Questions? All right. Thanks again very much.